we're in a series. We're kind of on the downhill slope of our series for the summer through the book of Acts, the church on fire. So we're looking, obviously, you all know this. We're looking at the early days of the church. The book of Acts has transitioned to the life of Paul, the ministry of Paul, and so I always thought his journeys were really, really important. It didn't dawn on me till like many years later. Paul was unique. He was so unique because the Jewish religion was centered on a temple in a city, and so you came to Israel, to Jerusalem, to worship God. Other religions as well were tribal. They were centered on a certain pieces of land, and you have to come here and do this to worship our gods. The transition from Judaism into Christianity focused on Jesus, and these missionary activities were unique in that nobody that we know of, hardly anybody that we know of, went out to proselytize. They went out over thousands of miles to share the good news about Jesus. So it became less about the temple and the land. It more became about the Spirit of God invading people's lives through the message of Jesus, the personal work of Jesus. So I don't know if you've ever caught that, but like Paul going out was a shift in religion itself. So I always thought that was really, really cool and curious. So today, we're going to talk about his kind of farewell tour. He doesn't fully know it. He probably realizes some things are going on. He feels this pull and this call back to Jerusalem, and he's visiting places along the way. Last week, we caught up with him in Ephesus, the church he planted there. He gone and visited the elders and the church congregation, and they're saying their tearful goodbyes. And along the way, what we'll run into is that on the mission that God has him on, Paul has twin dangers. There's a danger of comfort and safety. There's a danger of persecution and pushback on the mission. And he's constantly keeping the cause for which God has called him in front of him to move forward. How many of you have had good-meaning, well-intentioned friends try and talk you out of a decision? Do not raise your hand. We hopefully all have those friends, actually, that will push past discomfort and the awkward silences in some of those conversations about, like, are you sure about this? Like, you really want to buy that motorcycle? Nah. Like, you really want to go on that trip or do that thing or take that job? Like, we hopefully all have well-intentioned, good-natured friends that care about us. Paul has that. But for him, it becomes a temptation. For him, I'm sure, it becomes this like pull towards what people are inviting him into off of his mission. The portion of Acts that I read, I used to read this like in my 20s, like Paul is this kind of swashbuckling hero moving his way stealthily through the empire. And, you know, I don't know, I probably superimpose a lot of movies onto my early readings in my early days of being a Christian. Because now, after living some life, hitting my mid-late 40s and having a family and a mortgage, I realize like it may not be the swashbuckling adventure. I think some of that might be true. There's just cool things that God does and happens. Anymore, I'm just kind of wondering, you know, when Paul is like shipwrecked and he's hanging on to the hull of the ship in the middle of the water, do you think it ever occurs to him like, I wonder if I made a wrong turn somewhere? I wonder if I would have made some other decisions, would this have turned out a little bit differently for me, maybe better for me? I wonder, you know, when Paul's arrested in the dungeon in Rome, he's going, what did I do? I'm supposed to be this messenger of the good news of Jesus to the Gentiles, and I'm in prison? Like, how does that math, right? And certainly you've had that same wonder, like, where did I get off on this wrong path? You know, hanging on to your side of the ship, kind of just wondering, like, where did it all go wrong for me? I had this call, I had this cause, I had this thing that I knew that God wanted me to do, or at least I stepped out in faith. And why is it that my life has turned out like this? Like, my friends warned me, my other friends didn't warn me. You know, there's a whole mixture in there. And I just have to assume, like, Paul had those days too. I think Tolkien got the gist of this when in the first book, The Lord of the Rings, Frodo, they make it all the way to the House of Elrond. Can I nerd out just for a second? Is that okay? Okay. They make it to the House of Elrond. Here's what Frodo says. I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. And Gandalf, this just sage leader in his life, says, so do all of us who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. You see, Paul is in these situations. We've been in situations. Sometimes it's just not our fault. Sometimes there's no blame to give to anyone, but we are responsible in that moment for the results, for how we enter in to what's in front of us. We, in this American dream culture that we've been raised in, it's about pursuing your own happiness and avoiding discomfort and anything that would bring pain. And so when we read the words of Scripture, and even the inspiring, works of Lord of the Rings, some of it does feel like that's an alien concept to us, to go rushing towards danger, to actually embrace a life of the cross where you pick it up and you carry it. And that Jesus didn't promise us that things would be tidy and safe and there would be a bow on it at the end of the day. Paul's story doesn't even end with a bow on it. You get to the end of Acts, which we'll get to the end of Acts soon, you just realize, like, if you use a North American church scorecard on the life of Paul, he's failing. There's no way God could bless that if that's the results. There's no way God's moving in his life if you just read it through that scorecard. But I think if you were to talk to Paul hanging off the side of a ship or in prison, he goes, we're winning. Like, we're winning. Like, Paul, okay. Anyway, so Frodo, like us, we've been overwhelmed at what's asked of us. He wishes that the ring has never come, and Gandalf's answer is just, we don't get to choose our context, but we get to choose what to do in the midst of it. So like Paul, we have plenty of opportunities. Like Frodo, plenty of opportunities to wonder what is going on here. And so I just want to look. We're going to take chapter 21 and part of 22, and I want to give you this just raw language and understanding of the buffeting that Paul has to do, the self-discipline to continue on in his journey. So in Acts 21, we'll have it on the screen, start in verse 1. After we, and I want you to understand this, after we, there's a lot of we that's going to show up. This is Luke writing Acts. He's riding shotgun on Paul's journeys. And so he, in some ways, in chapter 21, he starts to kind of insert himself a little bit into the story by this we. But pay attention to where it shows up in these next verses. After we had torn ourselves away from them, the Ephesian elders, who they were weeping and crying because they knew they just probably would never see each other again, we put out to sea and sailed straight to Kos. The next day we went to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. We found a ship crossing over to Phoenicia, went on board and set sail. After sighting Cyprus and passing to the south of it, we sailed on to Syria. We landed at Tyre, where our ship was to unload its cargo. We sought out the disciples there and stayed with them 7 days. Through the Spirit, they urged Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. So they're sensing danger, not just by their intuition, not just by their gut. They're actually sensing in the Spirit. There's a spiritual discernment and insight that these believers that they're connected to are discerning, and they're urging Paul, hey, I don't think that's the way. Continuing on, verse 10. After we had been there a number of days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. Coming over to us, he took Paul's belt, tied his own hands and feet with it, and said, the Holy Spirit says, in this way the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem will bind the owner of this belt and will hand him over to the Gentiles. When we heard this, we and the people there pleaded with Paul not to go up to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, why are you weeping and breaking my heart? I am ready not only to be bound, but also to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. when he would not be dissuaded, we gave up. There, like Luke kind of gets in on, like, Paul, maybe we should stay here. Maybe we should listen to these guys. They're obviously like hearing things from the Spirit after we gave up and said, the Lord's will be done. I think that's really fascinating, how even like our ride or dies on the trip sometimes can even be swayed by the lull of comfort, the lull of safety. In 1939, Dietrich Bonhoeffer lived in the United States. He taught at Union Theological Seminary. He had he was just this child prodigy, brilliant guy. So he had his future laid out for him in America, if he chose so. And he had lots of people urging him, you can do so much good for Germany in the United States. You can speak against the Reich from the United States. Stay here, do theological work here, and we will protect you. And yet, he decided he would get on a boat and go back anyway to his home country, the country that was tearing itself and soon the world apart. He decided he would get on a boat, and he wrote to a mentor, Reinhold Niebuhr, that he said he had no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if he did not share in the trials of this time with his people. He knew what was waiting for him. He went back regardless, and 6 years later, he was executed by the Nazis just weeks before the camp he lived in and was held at, was liberated. Bonhoeffer had written years earlier that when Christ calls a person, he calls them to come and die, to take up their cross, to forsake everything else, and to go after Jesus. And he meant it as a description of the life he was willing to live, apart from peace and comfort and safety, to push forward into the cause and the call that God had for him. And so we see again here, the siren song of comfort and peace is calling to Paul. There's danger ahead, therefore you should stay with us. They were picking up on something in the Spirit, but false conclusions and wanting to protect their friend, good-natured, good-intending disciples of Jesus. So it's interesting, this ends up being a true word. Paul is arrested by the Romans. He is taken captive, as we'll see here in a minute. So it wasn't that the prophecy was wrong, it was the next steps. Yet Paul understood he lived for something greater than just what they offered. And so we'll continue. In Acts 21, verse 27, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us. This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law in this place." The whole city was aroused, and the people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. While they were trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in an uproar. He at once took some officers and soldiers and ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw that the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. The commander came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. Then he asked who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing and some another. And since the commander could not get at the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. So Paul is arrested, although this Roman commander doesn't really know why. So Paul, in between this break that you could read on your own, I'll just summarize. Paul actually pulls the guy aside and says, "Hey, can I speak to them?" He says, "Sure, why not?" Paul stands up and starts speaking in Aramaic. So the Jews that are present in Jerusalem perk up. Oh, it's not Latin that they're hearing or Greek. It's their own native home tongue. And so they listen to Paul, and Paul preaches this wonderful message of the gospel with power and explain to them how he was knocked off and blinded but healed 3 days later, and how Jesus is alive. And so he gets to this end part of his sermon, basically, in verse 19 of Acts 22. Says, the Lord is speaking to him. "Lord," I replied, "these people know that when I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you, and when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me," so he's explaining to the crowd, "the Lord said to me, 'Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles.'" The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, "Rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live." So they could not handle that Jesus was telling Paul, this Jewish leader was sent out to the non-Jewish people in the known world. They got to that point, and then they just shut their ears, couldn't listen anymore, and they were calling for Paul's life. So imagine Imagine you're reading this for the first time, and you haven't read it before, and this is all fresh. This is shocking. This is shocking that someone could stand up and say to a crowd certain things, and they're with him until they're not, and they call for his head. Someone so obviously, though, blessed by God as Paul. He's recounting his story, talking about how God has showed up time and again in his life, so used by God, so useful to God, and at the end, they arrest him and put him in prison. Like, how could this happen? That someone so useful to God, that this would be the plan. And it's confusing. Like, why when you would use Paul this way and such, like, he could preach so many more messages with large crowds, and you're going to put him basically in like a timeout in Rome. You're going to set him on ice and let him just chill there for however long. Like, how is this in the plan of God? How does it make sense? And again, if we're using a human rubric, if we're scoring God on his plans based on what we think is good and useful, then he fails. Paul fails. But if we're using a different kind of scorecard, if we're scoring this differently and we're looking at it through the eyes of the Lord, that's a completely different scorecard. And Paul would whisper to us, we're winning right now. We got the empire right where we want them, right? Like, that's the bigger perspective that sometimes we just miss. And aside from that, like, why would we expect this life to be hassle-free? Why would we expect to use the same scorecard as everyone else who doesn't follow Jesus for our metrics of success? Jesus himself, you got to check this story out. This is Matthew 16. He turns to the disciples. He looks right through Peter's soul, and he goes, "Who do people say that I am?" And they kind of mumble and bumble around, and Peter says to him, "Well, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God." Jesus says to him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." And from this time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, that he must be killed on the third day and raised to life. Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. Never look, because, if you're Peter and Jesus looks at you and goes, "Dude, like, no one told you that answer. You're really hearing from God on that one. And not only that, you're a rock. Like, I'm going to build my church on you." And you're feeling pretty good about yourself. So when Jesus says something you think is out of pocket, you start taking him aside, right? Because that's what Peter does. He immediately turns from affirming Jesus as Messiah to then rebuking Jesus, thinking, "That's not a good plan, Jesus. I've got the plan here. I'm the rock, remember? You said that to me, so I'm going to tell you what we should do." And so Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." That's quite a humbling. That's quite an extreme swing from affirmed in front of everyone to rebuked. You got to feel pretty small about yourself. "Get behind me, Satan, you're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concepts of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." So that's the path that Paul is on. That's what Paul understands, is that he's not on a path that ends in comfort and safety. He's not on a path that where he's going to listen to his detractors and be swayed by them. He's got something bigger that he's living for. He's got a cause. He's got a call to that cause to live out and live into the kingdom of God and spread and preach the gospel to whoever will listen. So what I want us to, if you get anything from today, it's this one thing. You must live for a cause big enough to carry you through, but not so all-consuming that it isolates you. You are made in the image of God. Paul's only special because he's Paul and you're not, right? You have the same Spirit of God living inside of you if you follow Jesus. And the way that he's designed us, the human heart, and what takes us to lock in for the long road is that you must live for a cause that's bigger than yourself, that yet is not all-consuming, or you don't let it become as all-consuming that it isolates you from other people. Let me explain, okay? I want to explain this first. I actually want to give you two cautions and then a little bit of a pathway forward, okay? The first is this: when you find a cause worth living for, it will probably become your identity for a short time. So actually, I want to walk you through the 6 phases of finding a cause worth living for, okay? See if you can see yourself in these phases. Okay, the first phase of believing in a cause is, whoa, this is super important, and I can't believe I didn't see it this way before. So it could be a cause, like a people group that you want to reach out to, like the local Afghan population. It could be a place, like I really have a heart for China, and the people in China, like I love them, and I want to go and minister and witness to them. It could be a people, place. It could be a position. You're called to a role of influence to lead people and influence people for the kingdom of God. Whatever your cause is, you're going to first whatever, go, I'm such an idiot. This is absolutely the most important cause on the whole world. I can't believe I didn't see it. Phase 2 is, wow, this is super obvious, and I can't believe these people around me don't get it. Like, this is super important. It's the most important cause. I wish people listened to me more. There's a little bit of self-righteous. All right, if we're honest, there's a lot of self-righteousness in those early stages of like, man, everybody needs to get on board with this thing like I am. Phase 3 is, anyone who disagrees with me about this must really be, fill in the blank. They're literally obtuse. They're literally an idiot. Like, we get really prideful and self-righteous about the causes that we believe in. And then at stage 4, there's a little bit of a pivot in phase 4 where we go, ouch. You guys aren't this is supposed to be a little self-deprecating. Like, we can all see it. Don't laugh. I don't want pity laughs. I'm just saying, like, we're in church, but we can actually laugh at ourselves and have a good time, because I guarantee you Jesus is laughing at us and some of the things that we do and say. You got to be honest, he's got a great sense of humor. So anyway, phase 4 is, ouch. This is hard, and things aren't improving like I expected. It costs more. It takes more time. It takes more people. It takes more everything than I thought, and it's really hard, and it's not going as well as I thought it would. 5 is, I think I need to calm down just a little bit. I think I need to take it down several notches, because the world already has a Savior. It doesn't need me to save it, okay? And then stage 6, if you're willing, because you can get caged at a lot of these, especially early stages. Oh, I get it now. The world is beautiful, and it's broken, and it takes all kinds of people doing all kinds of things, believing in all kinds of causes for us to fix it, right? That's where we want to land, is the appreciation of, like, I don't resonate with that as much, but I love that you're super into that. I love that you feel called to go there. I don't know that I feel like leaving my family to do the same is the wise decision for me. You see, like, you get to a place where you appreciate, like, I love that you're into that. Let's figure out how to resource you and cheerlead that, okay? So that's the first caution, is like, let's take it down several notches, okay? The second is to actually learn from Paul's detractors. To learn from and not get into any me mode about, like, the Romans were so terrible or the Jews were so terrible. The writer, like, Luke's point is that was us. That could have been us. If we were there, we probably would not have bought into where Paul was coming from. It would have probably taken a lot of time and a lot of pain for us to wake up to the truth of the gospel. So, in looking at the people that were pushing back, the Jews, the Romans, and were trying to derail Paul, we instead can learn from them. There's something that's been called fundamentalism brain, and I see it happening very much in the text, describing the Roman reaction, describing the Jewish reaction, specifically to Paul and the gospel that he preaches. Maybe you've dabbled in a little bit of fundamentalism brain too. I'll describe it. Fundamentalism is a way of looking at the world in a binary black and white. There's right and wrong only, meaning I'm right and you're wrong. That's fundamentalism brain. Fundamentalism brain lacks curiosity, cannot see nuance, detests uncertainty, and is prone towards rigidity. A lot of times, like, when you discover a cause, you get really fundamentalist about, like, if no one else is going to do this, I guess I'll just save the world on my own. Everybody else is an idiot. Like, that's how we think. That's fundamental. I'm right, they're wrong, end of discussion. That's the rigidity of just seeing things through that narrow lens. Pick a contemporary issue, and you've either run into it or dabbled in it a little bit yourself. Vaccines, travel sports, whether pickleball is a sport or not. I don't know what you guys say. I say kind of. And take, for instance, like really, I think my kids are in public school. I almost have a 16 and a 13-year-old. I have not gotten over that yet. But anyway, take school choice. Whether you're homeschool, public school, private school, there's people that have big opinions about how other people should school their kids. Not even how they should school their kids. There's big opinions about how other people should do their things. And man, I tell you, the mommy wars that and I don't mean to be misogynistic at all, it's just kind of a common phrase. But there's big opinions about a lot of things that you should do with your kids. A lot of fundamentalism, Brain, because that's the only way. That's the only way. It's the only way to do it if you really love your kids, or that's the only way to do it if you really love teachers, or really, fill in the blank. A lot of fundamentalism, Brain. Pick, not everybody's making eye contact with me. I'm not going to read into that too much, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, we're going to move on. And the real danger here is something called the law of group polarization. The law of group polarization is alive and well in our culture. That is a phenomenon that happens when you get around people that only think and say the things that you do. You kind of get rid of the moderating elements. When a group gets homogenized, the beliefs get more fringy because the moderating voices aren't there saying, have you thought about it this way? All the naysayers that you kind of roll your eyes at, we actually need them because they help us not be extreme and myopic. So the law of group polarization says that it's actually a good thing to have relationships where someone believes something different and you're able to say, well, I see where you're coming from, but I agree to disagree. That's super healthy and mature, isn't it? But that's so rare in our culture. And one thing over the 6 weeks that we were gone, that was one thing that kept popping up for me, by the way, when I would think about Mosaic and the culture. And what I appreciate is that I know a lot of you on a deeper than surface level, and there's a lot of us that are not in agreement on some secondary issues of just life. Even maybe bringing up private versus homeschool versus public school, you're kind of yeah, but I wish everybody saw it my way. You're kind of thinking that, but we're able to still be one community, and we haven't had flare-ups and fights over politics or, public health or different things like that. I appreciate that we are cultivating an environment where people from different perspectives can come and worship Jesus, and we're doing that on purpose. And it's super hard at the same time. Sometimes it's really nice to just kind of know where everybody's coming from and you can kind of let your guard down. We're actually pushing further into affiliation by agreement. It's actually affiliation by faith. Do we believe in Jesus as God? Do we believe in the brokenness and fallenness of humanity? Yes, and that's the most important thing about us. And so all the other things can be put in proper place of yeah, I think differently on XYZ issue, but not everybody has to think the same way that I do. And I find people super interesting, and I'm curious about them. And which actually connects to this. To avoid fundamentalism, Brain, let me just give you 3 quick things. I'm a list guy. I don't know if you can tell. I think in lists a lot of times just to categorize. The storytelling element sometimes isn't as, but I got another list for you. I actually got 2 more lists for you, so you're welcome. To avoid fundamentalism, Brain, we keep the main thing the main thing. What is the most important thing about you and me? That we're made in the image of God. We're trying to figure this life out and follow Jesus in some way, right? That's the main thing. Nothing has to divide us if that's the main thing. There are lots of ways to believe about theology and to practice worship and to do a lot of things. But as long as we keep the main thing, nothing has to divide us. Second is, straight from Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental, right? And I think that's Walt Whitman originally, but be curious, not judgmental. To be curious with people about the different perspectives and the different approaches to solving problems. And then third, we just got to avoid stupid, pointless arguments. And I'll say it like this. A lot of times when you say avoid pointless arguments, it's like ones that you think are pointless or you can't win. I would also say pointless arguments are the ones where you're trying to out-logic someone and win the argument. People are not convinced because you show them facts. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. So a pointless argument is trying to wrestle someone intellectually into submission when they're just getting like, I don't think you like me at all. I think you're just wanting to win this argument, and then I'm not going to hear from you again. That's a pointless argument too, okay? Okay. So I want to leave you with this, to find a cause. That is, I've preached a lot on finding your calling, your cause. I would do some of that differently nowadays. It's worth so much time that we obviously can't give today. But I want to point you in the direction. If you're at a point where you're just like, I'm having a hard time discerning, or I think maybe I missed it and I'm trying to get back on. I like to think of the will of God as a highway with many on-ramps. So even if you like crash out, there's still more invitations to get involved. Like Paul hanging off the side of a boat or in a Roman jail. Like God's call in his life was still true. It was still real. It didn't work out the way he expected it to, but there's many ways to get into the will of God. He's a very big and very generous God. So let me give you these 4 questions to just ask yourself and sit with. Who am I? What might I become? How is this? What is this world I find myself in? And how might I make a meaningful difference? Let me read those again. Who am I? What might I become? What is this world I find myself in? How might I make a meaningful difference? I think if you're asking yourselves and sitting with God with those questions, you're going to find it sooner rather than later. Now, at this point, a lot of times people, you just start to fill in this like, I'm too blank to do that. I'm too old. I'm too tired. I'm too poor. I'm too smart for that. I'm too dumb for that. Whatever it is. And I want you to know, thinking those things in pursuit of finding the cause for which Jesus created you is part of the journey. That's actually not a disqualification. If you read every story, every hero, because we resonate with it, wrestles with what they should be doing. And they have to overcome feeling tired or dismissed or looked over or left out. That is part of the story. I'm going to geek out for just couple more minutes, okay? I'm going to read you at length The Return of the King by Tolkien. Sam and Frodo are in Mordor. Okay, I told you I was going to nerd out, okay? Sam and Frodo are in Mordor, and they're just at the end of themselves. They're tired. Frodo's getting angrier and angrier as the ring is influencing him. And here's what Samwise Gamgee says. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I do now. Folk in these stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something, that there is some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. That's it, isn't it? Like at the end of the day, you might be too whatever, but there is a cause that God has created you for. And it's up to you to push in. You may not be at fault or to blame for any of it, but you're responsible for it. Because there is good in the world and it's worth fighting for. And I did just hear this by a poet, an author, and he said, anytime a character in a story asks, maybe I'm in a story, like Sam does, it should cause the reader to step back. What Tolkien had in mind is for us to step back and go, maybe I'm in a story then too. Maybe I'm in a story then too, right? And the answer to that is yes. You're in not just a story, you're in the story. You're in the story where the author wrote the ending and we win, and he entered in to carry us on and to carry us through to that glorious end. You're in a story. You're just not in your own story. You're not the main character. sorry, not sorry. You're in his story. He's already written the ending, and you're in it. That's a great story. I think you're great people, so I think that's a great story. So here's one thing. Why don't you stand with me, and I'll invite the communion servers and the worship team upwards. Here's something I want to invite you to ask yourself this week. Are my actions shaped more by the cause I live for or the beliefs that I argue about? You know, seeing that, I don't love that question. We're going to go with that question. I wrote that question, so I can say that. It's confusing. It's the idea of like, where's your baseline? Where do you make decisions from? Is it from believing that you're here for a purpose? Or is it like I have this like bubble of beliefs that I've just got to protect and fight anyone that contradicts me? Like one of those leads to flourishing and fulfillment. The other one leads to just like a nearsightedness on life. And I hope, wherever you're coming from, wherever you're at, that we can all make the pivot to believe that we're alive for a cause. And that's a good thing. And we function best when we're aligned with that. So with that, we're going to read the Lord's Prayer and receive communion. So you can do that with me. It'll be up here. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one.